welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am Jessica. I'm your host today, or one of them rather, because I am here with my amazing coworker. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jen. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Always happy. And we are here with one of our favorite authors who writes wonderful bonkers suspense books, Andrea Bartz. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Wonderful bonkers suspense. I think I'm going to put that on my business card. I like it.
It's got to be the blurb for you specifically wonderful bonkers suspense, because I can't imagine any other term, and it really is wonderful. So tell us a little bit about Last Ferry Out.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for those kind words, first of all. But I love this book too. I actually really think this is a fun book. So The Last Ferry Out is a thriller novel that's about a grieving woman who travels to the remote, tiny tropical island where her fiance died in a tragic accident a few months earlier. And she goes there kind of seeking closure, and she sees, the beautiful beaches and the nature preserve, and she meets this enchanting group of expats that her partner had befriended, and it kind of seems like it's working. It kind of seems like this is going to help her move on. But then she wakes up one morning to a text from one of the expats, and he says, "You deserve to know the truth about your fiance. Meet me at the cafe tomorrow at 9 a.m." So she rushes to meet him, and he doesn't show up. And even stranger, he seems to have disappeared from the island. So she begins to dig and uncover, secrets and lies and this web of deception on this little island. And it all leads her to question if her partner's death was really the accident that she believed, and if she might be trapped on an island with her killer. So May 20th is the publication date, and it's twisty and it's kind of a puzzle box thriller. It's sort of wrapped around a sapphic love story, so it's a great pride read as well. And yeah, I'm super excited for people to dive in.
So, like I said, your books are all like wonderful bonkers suspense, and each one of them is unique. Although you have a callback at least to one of them that I've noticed in here, which is my other favorite of yours, by the way. We Were Never
Oh,
Here.
thanks.
I love that book. I would love to know where this one began for you, this particular story.
Yeah. So it kind of began all the way back in 2020. I spent the month of February 2020 without knowing that that was going to be great timing on my part, traveling around Mexico solo. And, when you're traveling by yourself, you just talk to people and you meet people everywhere you go. And I'm not a fluent Spanish speaker. So everywhere I went, I was sort of meeting these expats and getting to know these expat communities. And they were so welcoming and so friendly and so happy to just kind of sweep me up into their, little social world for the few days that I was there before I moved on. And I loved spending time with them. But also, my thriller writer senses were tingling because it's kind of like, what is the deal with these people? Like, what's really going on? On the one hand, I was envious of them because they're living in almost literal paradise, and have this lovely seeming life with bonfires on the beach and swimming in bio bays and all that. But at the same time, it was like, these are people who have chosen to parachute out of their own lives to kind of in a sense forsake their families, their friends back home, everything they were born into, to be in this new place. Rarely was it sort of for a job. Often it was more because they wanted to be there. And I thought, are all of these people running from something or seeking something? What's really bringing them here? And then what was also fascinating to me, I really love kind of close-knit, closed-door social worlds, like an interesting social milieu. And they were these really close groups of friends, but I thought, what do you have in common other than all speaking English? Like if you were all in, Australia together, would you even be friends when you had all the options in the world? And So my mind just started kind of churning over what would happen if you took one of these motley crews of these interesting people from very different backgrounds and you threw a dead body right into the center of that group.
I'm really curious about how your travel experiences played into, I don't know if you'd call it building or designing your setting, Isla Colel. What parts of your travel did you preserve, and what did you change besides the addition of murder, which I hope wasn't a part of it, when you were there the first time?
That is correct. There was no murder. I feel such an obligation to make it clear. The expats I met were lovely and wonderful. None of this is, shade toward any of them. But the island that I created, which is again this like tiny little island with just a few hundred people on it, is fictional. I didn't want to have to set it in the real world. I wanted to make it, to fit my needs. But it was based on a few different things as inspiration. So, as I mentioned, I was doing that traveling in Mexico. That was mostly on the West Coast. So there were some elements of for example, everyone gathers on the beach every night to watch the sunset because it's the West Coast. And, there's these tiny communities that have sort of their own, WhatsApp threads and sort of their own sort of separate lives in this community of native Mexicans. I also, while I was working on this book, traveled to Isla Olbos, which is near Cancun, for a friend's birthday, kind of coincidentally. And I found that really inspiring because it's a beautiful island that you have to take a ferry to, with a nature preserve, with a bioluminescent bay that you can still swim in. But it also has kind of that tension of tourism as its main, economic engine, but then over tourism as a little bit of a problem potentially. And so that was something I wanted to explore. The island that I made up, Isla Colel, was once a bustling tourist destination, and then the one big resort there closed, and so now they're sort of trying to recover from that. And there's tension among the locals of, how touristy do we want to be, and the expats as well. Like, how many tourists do we want this to remain an undiscovered gem? So that was another big piece of the inspiration. And then finally, for the last few winters, my partner and I we live in New York, but we hate the cold. So we have traveled down to Puerto Rico for a few weeks every winter for the last few years. And we have generally stayed in Rincon, which is on the West Coast. So again, those amazing sunsets are part of it. But there's this hiking and mountain biking area that's south of Rincon that is really, really cool because it's really thick jungle. Like, you feel like you're in the rainforest. But after hiking for, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes, you start to encounter the ruins of buildings. And what's actually there is, I'm not sure if it's a sort of like a boarding school for boys with behavioral issues, or if it was actually sort of a juvie kind of thing. But there's this compound that I think was closed in like the 80s or early 90s. That's just, the buildings are standing, but the forest has very much taken it back and taken over it. And there's graffiti, and some of it's creepy, and there's bats, and there's, an old church and old sleeping kind of barracks that just have all these things growing. And that was super inspiring to me, I think, because of the creepiness. And that became the basis for this, lavish, incredible resort on a mountaintop on Isla Colel that has since closed and is now the site of these really interesting ruins. So it kind of came from a bunch of different things, but I actually got to work with a map maker and create a map for it, which is in the book. And that was very cool. That was like, we're taking this almost into the real world from what's in my head. That was a cool experience.
So I think one of the things that I felt right away when I started reading the characters was just sort of Abby's ambiguous loss of Esther, and how she wasn't really, it's like you have that anger towards somebody and that hurt towards somebody who passes, whether or not you know that it's accidental or whatever, but like, you really worked those emotions in very, very well. And at first, because I know that when I'm reading your books, it's not always, the deaths are not always so cut and dry, right?
Right.
I knew there was something more towards her fiance's loss, and the pieces that came together, I was very impressed because I was not expecting them to come together that way. But like I said, like that, just that like really genuine sense of just like something missing was so well written. I have to ask, I mean, you don't have to get too personal. Was that from a personal experience? Did you read about it specifically?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you for those kind words as well. What's interesting is I didn't set out to write a book about grief. It was really more mechanical. I had this idea of this island and these expats, like I said, like take that social circle and just toss a dead body right in the center. But I knew that I needed my main character to have a really clear and interesting reason to be there and to be in the middle of all of this. And I couldn't come up with something better than because her partner had died there. That was a really compelling reason for her to go and for her to want to know more and to continue, down the rabbit hole of what really happened on this island. So it was sort of a mechanical plot reason that I included that. But then once I started writing, I realized it was really yeah, a story about grief and a story, like I said, kind of wrapped around a mystery wrapped around this love story. And I intended the book when I began to be pretty straightforward in the structure and the storytelling of just, present tense, start to finish. And then I realized I needed to add these other elements. I needed to add flashbacks so that we could see Abby and Esther, the couple, together when Esther was alive. And then I realized we needed to hear from Esther too, and I wanted to jump back and have a dual timeline, hearing about her time there and their different experiences there. So there wasn't really a personal grief that grieving that the book was based on, but I think this is one of the first books I have written since I met my partner a few years ago, and she's my person. And that makes it feel very different from, the things before that you hope will last, but kind of maybe know deep down won't. And so I think a lot of the feelings of grief just came from me extending my imagination to like what would happen if that ended? What would happen if that was taken away? Because, what's the quote about how grief is just love with nowhere to go anymore? So it was, yeah, sort of an act of love for me to be writing this kind of sorrowful story. And then it was also fun to think about taking this relationship, acknowledging that not everything was perfect in it, and how would that play out in how she's grieving and how Abby reacts to information about what Esther was really up to, or maybe some things that Esther was keeping from her, and vice versa. That created kind of a really unique opportunity to have character growth and have, sort of both characters realize things about themselves through the relationship, even though one is dead. And that just kind of felt unique and weird and like a cool thing to try for me. So, because you've read it, there's some interesting and maybe unexpected revelations that come from both of them thinking about the other while the other is not physically present.
I'd love to know more about how managing multiple timelines and perspectives allows you to sort of shape a thriller. Because especially when you're dealing with characters who have secrets and with big, juicy twists, like those multiple perspectives and timelines can really let you like manipulate tension and the
Yeah.
reveals and stuff like that. So like, how does that play into how you structure a novel?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it was quite a dance. It kind of felt like I was doing delicate surgery by the end. But, I mentioned those elements that I decided to include. And then I realized I also wanted to hear from some voices on the island because this was not a story exclusively about outsiders or exclusively about, the gringos who come to Isla Colel. I also wanted to include some voices from actual islanders. And so there's some sort of like vignettes, almost like short stories from some people who have been on the island longer or sort of have different perspectives to being there. And I write without an outline. So I wrote all of these elements in like a totally chaotic form. And then when I had an entire book, I made an outline. So after I have a manuscript, that's when I make my outline based on what's there. And I color coded it so that I could see at a glance, in different colors, what's a relationship flashback, what's the, dual timeline from Esther's perspective, what's a vignette from an islander. And I could look at them. And that is when I started doing the delicate surgery of just moving pieces around. I realized, oh, I wrote these relationship flashbacks in kind of a crazy order, but it works really well if I do them in reverse chronological order. And we start with the, latest memories, and then we move all the way to their earliest time together, for example. And oh, I have, 3 or 4 other pieces in a row and I'm missing. I need to add back the front story because people are going to be invested in what's going on with Abby, and I can't have it be too lopsided or too many vignettes in the second half and not the first. So I just did a lot of playing around with things and looking at, okay, where do I have a great cliffhanger ending to a chapter? Because that's a great cue for me to step aside and bring in another voice or bring in another clue. And yeah, I moved things around. I added things to sort of up the mystery or the question that another element is going to answer so that, you feel like these pieces are kind of snapping together. Um, and yeah, I mean, it was as simple as like something got moved from chapter 13 to chapter 2, and then maybe I later ended up making it chapter 28. Like I was truly moving things around, but it kind of felt right when it all snapped into place.
I really do love the use of multiple timelines and multiple narratives because it gives you that like Rashomon aspect. For those who are not familiar, Rashomon is I don't know if it predated this, but it's a Kurosawa movie where there's something that happens and you see different people's perspective and everybody has their own opinion on how things happened. And the thing that's great about it is like nobody's opinion or observation, I think opinion is not the right term. Observation, nobody's observation is 100% incorrect or correct. It's
Mhm.
just unique to how they're watching it. And I think you bring that out very well in this, and Abby is somebody who is reaching out for connection and
Mhm.
also idealizing her relationship because you know what, you're never going to be able to resolve those things that
Exactly.
she kind of realizes might not have been perfect in her relationship. You're never going to be able to work on them. You're never going to have the wedding and then be
Mhm.
like, hey, we should talk about this thing. And I liked that, but I also just sort of loved just getting that from the background characters and how they saw not only each other, but their relationship to the island and, what Esther represented and what Abby represented.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. I mean, I will never get enough of dramatic irony. Like one of my favorite things in a movie or a book or anything else is to revisit the same occurrence, but from a totally different perspective and, to know something that a different character doesn't know because you're seeing it, objectively, or you're seeing it more often from somebody else's eyes. I just think that's kind of delicious and fun to read. So I think I set out with the intention of just playing with that and having fun with that. But you're right, it sort of started to click together where collectively the different perspectives got us thinking more about the island and the people on it as sort of this living organism. And the different people had different opinions about, I mean, you're exactly right about what Abby and Esther were doing there and represented there, and how the people of the island were working together towards certain goals and working separately towards other goals. And yeah, to me, it sort of gave that like it takes a village feeling to this community, which was really cool because I, as a writer, felt like I was uncovering that as I went. Like I knew there was an island, I knew there were people on it, and I figured there would be some tension, especially between the expats and the locals. And I knew there'd be some points of agreement, and I didn't know what they were. And so for me, it was sort of a process of uncovering as I wrote. And it was really cool to feel like by the end, I'd sort of wrapped my mind around this community that is neither perfect nor, imperfect. Is neither, like you said, is like there's no objectivity, there's no correct or incorrect, but everything is shades of gray. And that was fun to work in.
This might seem like a left field question at the beginning, but I will get back to the book. So I know that you've done journalist work and editorial work for a number of outlets, and one of them is Psychology Today, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Does that experience play into how you depict both like relationships and those complex group dynamics that you've been talking about?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's more correlation than causation. I did a minor in psychology when I was in college, and my first job at a women's magazine, I was in the lifestyle department, which meant I was doing sort of positive psychology, how to, make yourself happier and more fulfilled and all those things. So I just loved psychology from the start, which made Psychology Today a good fit for me to work at. I'm sure I learned a lot more there, having, all these interviews with PhD psychologists and stuff. But I just have always found human behavior so fascinating, and especially relationships, and just trying to understand where other people are coming from, how people are interacting, something that, intention, how you intend something can be very different from how it's actually perceived. I mean, something I do with my manuscripts, not when I'm writing, because when I'm just trying to get out that vomit draft, I'm just trying to get it down. But once I have a little bit more of the sense of the story, I go back through it and try to look at every scene from the point of view of the other character or characters in that scene instead of just my narrator, because, everyone's actions make sense to them. So that always leads me to changing some little details or changing how they reply or changing maybe an expression they make in reaction, because I think like what do they know? What do they not know? How are they going to take these things that my narrator is saying to them? And I think that adds some richness and also, again, contributes to that sense. If there's a theme, we keep going back to this theme of like, there is no black and white answer, right? Like everything is shades of gray, and everyone's bringing their own experience and biases and, background and baggage and secrets and all those things to every conversation and every scene that they're in this book. So I think my undying love of psychology definitely shows up on the page with how I just sort of am fascinated by the character dynamics and can get maybe a little bit too deep into their relational stuff. And whenever I get accused of writing a slow burn thriller or that my books are slow, I'm like, that's because I want to know everything about these characters, don't you?
So because I kind of mentioned it earlier, do all of your books kind of take place in the same universe? I was really sort of taken aback by seeing that little nod to at least one of your former books in this one.
Yeah, so I had never done an Easter egg before in one of my books to an earlier one. I hadn't done a callback. And there's actually three little Easter eggs in this book. There's the one that everyone is going to notice, I hope, and then there's a few other little details of a place that really exists in both books and that kind of thing. And I just realized I love it when other books do it, and I think it's so fun to go, oh my gosh, like this is all in the same universe. And I was like, wait, I'm the author. I can do that. And I think there was also a bit of a nod because We Were Never Here was sort of my breakout book. It was Arise's book club. It was the one that brought a lot of new eyeballs to me and new readers my way. And my book after that, The Spare Room, was very different. It was sort of sexy, gothic, domestic suspense. It was quieter. It was set during the pandemic. It was kind of sexy. There's a throuple. And so it was very different. And then I thought of this book as, after that claustrophobic book, I wanted to write another thriller that felt more like I don't know, return to form sounds a little too highfalutin, but just this idea of, where it's immersive, it takes you on vacation when you're reading, you're outside a lot, there's sunlight, there's just a lot of elements that kind of feel similar to We Were Never Here. And so I thought it would be fun to also, give a little nod to that. So it wouldn't matter if you had not read We Were Never Here. Certainly, there's no It won't throw off your understanding or anything. But for those who did, it's just sort of a little thank you to them, a little wink.
I hate to, keep pressing you about sort of like character and the psychology aspects, but I am also really interested in that. And there is no slow burn too slow for me. Like I love spending time immersed in that stuff. How do you get to know your characters? And I'm curious, like, especially how much you know before you start writing and how much you discover in the process of writing.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I could talk about this all day too. So don't apologize. Like I said, I write without an outline. I start with just a hook. And so I don't know much about my characters when I begin. I might have a really broad stroke of, this person's kind of impulsive, or this maybe like one or two adjectives of like big picture, who is this person and how is that going to inform their voice? But I don't really know any of the details until I start writing. And then it feels like I'm meeting them. It feels like every character is a new person that I'm meeting and getting to know.
I liked it. And it's also, I have to say, I found you through The Herd, which is also very good. But that's
Thank
like
you.
completely different character study, right? Like this is this, and We Were Never Here, and even
The Spare Room.
The Spare Room. But I feel like, The Spare Room. But I feel like this one is like a good mix of the two, because you do have like the slightly claustrophobic setting, but you have the different personalities who are playing into the mystery of everything.
Yeah. I love a close-knit, closed-door social milieu. And my debut, The Lost Night, that was true as well. It was sort of set amongst this group of friends who are partying in Brooklyn in 2008, and they're little 23-year-old hipsters. So in every case, it's kind of this subculture that I'm really fascinated by. And I was talking about getting to know my characters and how, as I write them, that's how their personalities begin to emerge for me. So they start to sort of distinguish themselves on the page. And then by the end of that first draft, I have a pretty good sense of everyone's personality. And then I do have to go back, and maybe in those early scenes, they're not themselves enough yet, or their voices sound too similar, or they're easy to mix up. So then I have to go back and do some differentiating. But yeah, the characters, it feels like I'm meeting new people and getting to know them, and getting a fuller and fuller sense of their personality as I write.
Very cool. Well, this was a delight, and I know people are going to love it. Are you already into a draft of something else, or are you going to take a little bit of a break?
I am not well into, I'm beginning to draft the next book, which I'm very excited about. It's a little bit different. It's sort of a horror slash thriller, which for me is different. And I've just always loved horror movies and horror books. And so it's pretty fun to dip my own toe into that genre. But I think it'll have a lot of the same elements people love, of twists and mystery and dead bodies and a really interesting little social milieu within a confined space, in a sense, within a defined area. So I'm having a lot of fun working on the next one.
Exciting. I'm
Very
very
exciting.
excited
Yeah,
for
me
that.
too. All right, I'm good. What about you?
Yeah, that was all my questions. Thank you so much for talking to us and sharing your book with us.
Thank you so much for having me on. This was so fun. I loved all your questions and could talk, character and psychology with you guys all day. So thank you for that.
All right. Well, this was wonderful. I'm Jessica with Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I don't know why I made that a question. That is absolutely who we are. I'm here with
Jen, on behalf of Turn the Page podcast, I'm going to explain it.
and our guest was the amazing Andrea Bartz, and we will hopefully see you next year for whatever you're coming up with next.
Amazing. Thank you again. Have a good one.
We are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.